Hello, hello.
Hey man, what's up?
What's up, dude? How you doing?
Great, great. Nice to talk to you.
Dude, it's good to talk to you too, man. So I know this isn't going to be like a traditional coaching lesson type thing. It's going to be more of like a game consultation type session.
Uh-huh.
So you
Yeah.
you take the reins. Normally I do, but since it's kind of your thing now, you take the reins, and I'll just kind
Yeah.
of like answer questions and stuff.
Sure, sure. Yeah. So, first of all, thank you for accepting this non-standard kind of coaching session.
Yeah, no problem.
Uh, Also, like I wanted to thank you for bringing me back into esports and loving like competitive gaming. Thanks to your B2GM guides. So, thanks for that.
Hell yeah, good shit, man.
Awesome. So, basically, uh, I'm starting. I'm actually I used to be a
Okay.
software engineer. Now I'm kind of retired from that and studying other things. But I still want to program for from time to time. And game development is kind of a something I always wanted to do, but never actually got to do it. So now that I'm no longer professionally doing software, I figured that maybe in my free time I could do it like once per week, coding a video game with no rush and no
Sure.
like economic objectives in developing the game. Um, so I only started like last week, so I don't have anything other than a really basic RTS engine where you can move stuff around with your mouse. But I figured it was a good idea to just brainstorm some game design ideas with you, especially since I would love for this game I'm developing in my free time to be eventually a competitive game, right? And
Yeah.
I thought you would have lots of input on that and insights on how Starcraft is good as a competitive game and what makes it a competitive game, right?
Yeah.
Um, so I've written down some questions, but we can do this as structured or unstructured as you'd like. It's just more like a conversation, and then I'll just use that to inform my game design decisions.
Yeah.
Um,
I'm down to do
so
whatever, man. Oh, sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you. Sorry, my bad.
what's that? Sorry.
I said I'm down to do it however you want to do it. I don't mind. But then you started talking
Awesome,
again, and I was like, sorry for interrupting.
awesome. So and some questions maybe it's okay if you don't want to answer them. So just
Sure.
skip them and it's fine.
Okay.
So my first question was like, how did you get into pro gaming with StarCraft? Like when and how did you decide? Okay, I'm gonna go all in with this. I'm gonna play games competitively. And why did you choose StarCraft specifically?
So I've always been competitive with games. It's just like who I am. Um, I uh, I would say I chose to go with StarCraft 2 specifically because of complications with team games. Like basically my friends and I were always really good at games. We've like, and it's not just one game. We've bounced around. Like we were really good at Heroes of New Earth. We were good at Dota. We were good at World of Warcraft. We were good at
Okay.
FPS. But we like, I wouldn't say we were pro level in every game, but we were actually able to go. We were playing with people who did actually go pro at points in time. And then I was supposed to go pro with World of Warcraft actually, and we were gonna go to tournaments, but my buddies kind of like they wanted to, but then didn't want to at the end, like the last second. We're like, you know what? I don't want to do flights anymore. I don't want to. I don't want to go do hotels. I don't want to pay for that. So I told myself I was gonna go pro at the next game that I could rely on myself only, where it would be a solo based game. And I was also good at RTS because I played so many genres of games throughout my life. So I've always been competitive as well. So I've always tried to be like as good as I could be.
Oh
But
yeah.
when Battle Reports in like 2008 and like the announcement of StarCraft 2 came out, I told myself I was going to go pro in StarCraft 2 and I was going to be competitive with this game.
Cool. Sounds amazing. So my next question would be like, what do you think about StarCraft? Uh, I mean, what do you think that makes StarCraft have such a wide or large skill gap between, say, bronze and GM?
There's okay, so when it comes to game design, I'll answer this question from like a game design aspect in my opinion.
Hmm.
Um it's because of how much control you can put into your units. It's very, very, very specific. And doing something like 1 second difference or like half a second difference or like just milliseconds of difference of how you micromanage your units with attack, move, stop, hold position, reinitiate commands repeatedly, stutter step, all these little moves you can do. Like Blizzard is the only game company that makes RTS that actually has this ability. Like every other RTS I've ever played has very limited amounts of micromanagement you can do, and the way you can like get comfortable with it and really learn the ins and outs of how units work. And Brood War was even more so than StarCraft 2, where the units were super stupid, but if you just kind of learned how to like fix the stupidity of the units, you could become suddenly really good with the units, and other people could not replicate that because it's something you don't just look at and you can do. It's something you have to like feel and master. That is yeah, the level of control Blizzard gives to RTS to their games like StarCraft and Warcraft. It's way more than any other RTS I've ever played, and it's that I would say that is the biggest difference as to why you can get such big skill gaps, because being able to master that with everything else, like being able to scout and read a scout, being able to map control like everything and know what is good and what is not good, you know, knowing strategies, knowing how to execute said strategies, all this stuff is obviously skill gap things as well that can increase or decrease your skill level, but the level of control you can put into your units is insane, for sure.
Okay. Interesting. And a question about that. Like you mentioned both like the fine control of units and also like knowing about the game, specifically like knowing, I suppose, counters to units or what strategies are safe and which strategies aren't.
Yeah.
And how do you like? And I also heard like some people criticizing some games, for example, chess, for being way too focused on like the skill being a function more of how many positions the player remembers instead of being more about making good decisions given new situations. How much do you feel StarCraft is about knowing the right answer in each situation? And how much do you think is about improvising and being able to make decisions fast? And how do you think that affects like skill level of players?
I would say it's like 99%. Yeah, I think I get what you're saying. I think it's like 95% or something. Like it's a very high percentage of knowing what to do when something happens. It's very limited about improvising, because StarCraft 2, the way it's kind of been balanced and designed is it is kind of a game of hard counters. So you can't just do anything you want to beat anything you want. So like for instance, if let me just throw this out there. If I'm like a guy in Zerg vs Zerg and I'm going mass Zerglings and my opponent has lurkers, there's very limited amounts of ways I can win that game. It basically is somehow like going to be discovering where the lurkers leave, like maybe trying to like make him move out of position and kill his base, because every single instance where I will fight lurkers with Zerglings, there is no way I'm just going to micro that and win suddenly. I will lose every time, because a lurker is a very, very hard counter to a Zergling.
Yeah. So there's kind of like a skill floor you need to get over by learning about the game and like the dynamics and what works and what doesn't. And after that, you think it's more about like the multitasking and specific like control skills?
Yeah, I think multitasking is the biggest skill of all in StarCraft 2, and that's why sometimes you'll get two pro players where one player just has a style that just works really well against another, and he just out multitasks him. So that one pro could be substantially a bit better than the other pro, but they're both pro level. But then whenever people watch that match and like if it's like broadcasted, and then everyone's like, "Wow, that pro that's losing, he looks like he's like Gold League or he looks like he's Silver League," because it's like there is such a like, and I'll say this too. It's impossible to play StarCraft 2 perfect. No one will ever do it. It will never be done, because if you really think about how, like what playing StarCraft 2 perfect entails, it would be being able to not only never fuck up your macro ever, and like have perfect macro, which I think some people can do. Yeah, you'll have games here and there that do have like really close to perfect macro, but It's like literally every time you have the exact mineral count, you just spin it, spin it, spin it. But it's also being able to control 200 supply of units perfectly, and no one can do that while macroing perfectly as well. That is impossible, because no one has like 10,000 APM to be able to micro like 25 screens at the same time, and micro like even workers, like every worker is always optimally mining every single time. Every unit is being optimally microed. Like have you ever seen a good example of this, which is why this is physically impossible for humans to do this? Have you ever seen the it's not Alpha Star, it's the Automaton micro videos?
No, I've seen Alpha Star though.
Okay. The Automaton micro videos show you what you could do with your units if you had unlimited micro. And like for instance, there was like the example I'll give you that was if you had like 10 siege tanks that were all in siege mode that were spread out as well versus like 80 Zerglings or something like that, or like 60 Zerglings. And then if you just A-move it, and you even maybe if you even try to like split a little bit, your Zerglings just get destroyed. Like maybe one tank dies and all the Lings die because they just get splashed and die. But with the way the Automaton Microbot did it, was it looked at each tank, every single time all 10 tanks were shooting, it looked at every single tank shot simultaneously, and it recognized what Zergling was getting focus fired, and it would circle spread every Ling around that Ling, and only one Zergling every single time would get hit. And it would do it for 10 tanks simultaneously. And then it would literally, so every time a volley went off of the tanks, it would be like 10 Lings die, 10 Lings die, 10 Lings die, not like 40 Lings die because of the splash. And the Lings actually crushed the tanks because it had perfect micro, and it never got splashed once. Like, and that's physically impossible. No one can do that. No, not a single person could do that. So it's, yeah, that's the point I'm trying to make here is the skill ceiling of StarCraft 2 is impossible to reach. And it's every single year that this game exists is basically the top of curve of StarCraft of skill. They're trying to like get closer and closer and closer and closer to like playing to perfection, but no one ever will. It's just how close can you get there, basically.
Okay, interesting. How much would you say the psychological element comes into play at very, very high levels, say like GSL, where it's also a matter of choosing a good build to counter potentially what your opponent is going to open with?
I would say in ladder, I'm just gonna say I'm gonna give you a quick analysis of ladder, then go to the pro level. in ladder, it only really happens when you play someone that you've played a lot. Otherwise, it's just random. It's literally just random. But if you have like a storyline with somebody where it's like I played this guy a lot, or like it's like the 20th time I've played him, then there might be some psychological aspects to it there. Because when you guys start to recognize how each other plays. But in pro level, it happens with very high level pro level, like we're talking like GSO level. It happens all the time. There's lots of psychological play there because these players play each other not only probably in practice quite often, but they also play each other in pro setting matches quite often. So there'll be builds that won't really apply as hard to ladder because it's a build that has been fine-tuned by somebody where it's like, I think this build will exploit the other person's weakness because of they play maybe a little too greedy at times, and I'm going to abuse that. I'm going to kind of take a gamble here and think that they're going to play greedy again, and I'm going to try and exploit that by doing some super risky build that could potentially kill them. And stuff like that. If that makes sense.
Okay. Yeah. Interesting. So now going more into specific questions about game design ideas I've been having for my own game.
Okay.
Like the question will still be about StarCraft though. Do you think StarCraft would work in some weird way without micro or without macro? So let me state the question.
Okay, sure.
Yeah, imagine in StarCraft, you could pick before you start the game which build order you want an AI to do, and then you just micro your units. Or alternatively, you can only focus on building and choosing what buildings to build and what upgrades, and an AI will just micro your units. Do you think that would be an interesting competitive game? Do you think it would be fun to play? Or just thoughts in general?
I think it could be fun to play, and I think it could be an interesting game, but I do not think it would be a competitive game. The reason why is because, like, you're basically, I feel like you're talking about a game that's very similar to something like Desert Strike. Do you know what Desert Strike is?
Nope.
Okay, so I'll give you an example. Desert Strike is a game that I'm not gonna lie, my buddies don't actually like playing StarCraft 2. They really don't. They're like, I'd rather not play. But then they found out about Desert Strike, and they're like, hey, you want to play some Desert Strike? Let's play some Desert Strike. Like that sounds fun. And like it's more relaxing. It's not as stressful as StarCraft. It's a more of a chill environment. And what you do is you can choose to be greedy and make economy, but you don't micro it at all. You just literally go make economy. I spend money on economy, so you invest into it. You just control the money aspect of it.
Okay.
And then or you can choose to go into units, and you can choose to balance this either one to be like, I'm gonna go into economy now. I'm gonna go back into units now. I'm gonna go really heavy into economy, or I'm gonna go really heavy into units. You can just choose which one you want to go for, and you can choose which units you make. But it is all automated by AI. And it is enjoyable to play. It is fun. I'm not going to say it's boring. But I don't see how that could be super competitive as an esport, because I feel like there in games like that, there always comes to be something that is just figured out that is like super fucking abusable or super abusive. And because you can't get around that. And then it just becomes like spammed repeatedly over and over and over and over. And then it could get buffed or nerfed. And then the next thing gets figured out that is abusable. And it gets repeatedly spammed over and over and over. The game model of that design, in my opinion, is a game that is fun when you don't know what you're doing. But as soon as you do know what you're doing, it's very, very repetitive.
Okay. I need to look at that game specifically, but just as a general question, like, why do you think removing either macro or micro could like destroy the competitive aspect of a game?
Because
Like,
it's
I'm not.
sure. Go ahead, keep going.
No, I was going to say I'm not exactly sure how Desert Strike works. That's why I'm asking.
Okay. Do you know tower defenses? This is a good example too.
Yeah.
Have you played? Do you have a lot of experience playing any tower defenses?
Not a lot, but I have experience.
Okay. Well, I'll describe my experience playing tower defense as well, which is exactly what I feel like you're talking about as well. With the game, if you have like limited control, tower defense is like when you first play tower defense, it's a lot of fun. You're like, okay, I don't know what's good, I don't know what I'm doing, but I'm like exploring and I'm figuring stuff out, and this is fun, and it's exciting because you're trying to like always optimize what you're doing better. And then you like if you lose, you're like, I want to go again, see how far I can get next time. I want to go again, see how far I can get next time. And then eventually you do beat it. You eventually come to beat it, and the way you beat it is you're like, I have figured out like the build essentially. That is like the GG build. That is like every stage of the way overpowered. Everything is just like super good at this stage, and then it just works really well. And then if you have it, it's just that's how I see games with limited amounts of control. Because the thing about being able to micro and macro is there's variance where I can just because like I'm gonna go back to the Zergling Lurker example I gave you. Just because Lurkers hard counter Lings doesn't mean I'm automatically going to lose that game if I take that fight. But if I do take that fight, I am definitely going to lose. Very high chance I lose. But maybe I can run around the map a lot and keep my opponent annoyed and busy because I can have physically micromanage it and tell my units to not do something like just physically clash, die, clash, die, clash. That now it's like I can be like run around and be annoying. Like I'm changing my whole strategy style where I'm like now just obnoxiously run around their base, but don't actually take a fight. Be non-committal. And suddenly I transition my army into something better that I can actually fight what he currently has and now counter him. So it takes away that whole aspect of it if it's AI automated, because AI doesn't have the intelligence to be like, okay, now I want to stop attacking and I want to go for like run around, like give him the run around, because games like that are always so basic to the point to where it's all automated in the sense that you always take a wave and you fight and you kill each other. Like you just, the AI just like always goes for the attack essentially. It's because how it's like coded, I guess.
Yeah, that's great. I was actually thinking about this like in the previous weeks, and I was kind of forming a concept in my mind where on the one end you have a purely micro game, and on the other end, if you don't have micro, I was thinking like which games are kind of like that. It's only macro, and maybe something like a card game where you have absolutely no pressure on your mouse skills or your hotkey skills.
Yeah.
And it's still a fun game and it can be competitive. And there I realized you have the chance element that gives you like the high skill ceiling, because you need to do lots of math to, like, first, you need to know the opponent's deck, and you need to do math in your head to realize if what's the chance of my opponent having this or that card to counter this play. But I guess if you don't have chance, a game where you don't have micro makes no sense. And I was kind of suspecting that, and you confirmed this with your arguments.
Yeah.
So going more specifically to some of my ideas, what I really like, one of the aspects I really like about StarCraft is the asymmetry between races. So the very different mechanics for Zerg, Terran, and Protoss. And I was thinking, what if I could build a game where one player does only micro and the other player does only macro, but in some way it's balanced so that it's still fun to play either role. You kind of took down that idea with everything we've discussed already, but just let me explain it a bit.
Okay. Sure. Okay.
So one kind of conceptual way to implement that would be something like one player controls a character, or maybe more than one character, say a party of adventurers going inside a dungeon, and the other player is like a dungeon master that builds the dungeon as the player is exploring it. In kind of, I'm still very early, so I don't have the specifics, but I was thinking something like one player only builds traps and challenges for the other player, and the other player needs to actually micro the way in and out of the dungeon after solving some quest. But I see how that could be a problem, because as soon as someone figures out the most difficult, I mean the optimal way to make the most difficult challenge for the other player, that's gonna be like the only way people will play. So maybe it could be something more towards like one player does more macro and less micro, and the other player does only micro, so that the one building the dungeon would have to micro some elements of what he built. But does that make any sense?
Yeah, I think the only way you can make a game like that repetitive fun, because I agree with you. I think you get to a point where if you always had 100% of your decision was how you decided it, you would figure out the efficient way to do it and be like, this is the most efficient way to abuse somebody if I'm the one creating the dungeon or something like that. And then they would expect what you're going to do if they know what they're doing as well, because they're like, I know what the best stuff is. You occasionally will run into some meta players that'll do something off the wall and do something awkward, but most players will just get a system that's like, this is the best and this is what I do. So a game like that, I feel like would work best if you wanted to really balance. If you wanted to balance something like that around it, would be like you would have to pick and choose. Like maybe you could have tiers of like traps, okay? And maybe like you have like all the way up to like 10 tiers of traps, and tier 10 would be like amazingly powerful traps, and tier 1 is like your basic, like there's like a dart in the wall or something like that. And it would be like you'd have like options where you could have like maybe 5 options at once, and you'd have to pick and choose. And maybe the map itself is randomly generated, and you have to like the person building the dungeon has to like set up the randomly generated dungeon with the randomly given traps that they're like, they can choose from like a choice of like 5. That would create a lot of replayability, in my opinion, because there'd be a lot of randomness to it. But it's like you pick the best sequence through the randomness to give you the most optimal route. But it's never the same though. Because if you also have the person design the dungeon, maybe people find out that like a certain way to like bottleneck an area with a certain trap is it's almost impossible to pass that part. And they're always, every single time you're like, oh, there's that same spot that everyone always does. It's like this little bottleneck area that I got to run into, and I'm expecting to die right there. And it always happens. And you're like, and it's like very, very unlikely you're going to pass it. And and then it has to get patched. And you're like, okay, well, that happens like every time. And then something else gets figured out. That's the abusable part. So, yeah, I feel like a random system would have to be kind of like implemented there to make it replayable.
Okay, that's interesting. Yeah, so what I'm getting from this is like, if one of the players doesn't do micro, they can just think in advance their strategy, and it will always be better, or they will find an optimal solution that could be abused. So you either need to put some randomness to the macro only player, or you need both players to micro
Yeah.
something about.
I'm gonna
Okay,
I want to
that's
say
great.
this too. I want to say this. This is very very true about gamers in my opinion. There's two types of gamers, and it's not as simple as like hardcore and casual. That is kind of the terms I'm going here, but I'll describe them. The casual gamer, you can balance a game however the hell you want, and if it's just kind of fun to play, they'll have fun every time. Because the casual gamer is not going to play a game and think about how to abuse the game. They're just going to play the game, and they're just going to have fun. Which is, I would say, more often the average player, because more people are that way, because they have other things going on in their life. They're just playing to relax, or maybe they think they're competitive, but they really don't think about the game in a competitive way. They just like to play, and they feel competitive. They want to win, essentially. But then you have the players that, if you want to retain a hardcore aspect of your community for your game to grow, you have to really cater to the hardcore gamer, which is you will always have like a section of players that will literally look at every way your game is balanced, and they will do stuff. Just they'll trial and error. They'll experiment at first, and then somebody will figure something out. And this happens way faster nowadays with Twitch and streaming and the age of like social media. This used to happen slower before that shit existed. But now with all this like information sharing that everyone does, as soon as something gets figured out that is efficient, more efficient, it just gets like mainstreamed to like higher levels of play. And then when you get the hardcore players, they will always look at this and they will go, how can I abuse this more so that I win more often? How can I keep abusing this? How can I abuse this even more? And if they find something that is abusable, and if there is some type of like ranking system that they care about, they will always abuse as much as possible, and they will repeatedly do that. And if it's too repetitive and too abusable, it will get boring very fast. Because then it'll just be like, I'm playing the same stupid thing again. I'm playing the same stupid thing again. And then it's because players really want to win. I think the hardcore player will care more about their record than about the aspect of the fun of the game, the way it's designed. Because to them, fun is being good.
Okay, that's very interesting. So that a good game, I mean, a game that can turn competitive needs to be, on the one hand, it needs to enable the hardcore gamers to actually find those strategies that give them good win percentages, but also needs to kind of respect players that can play casually and want to see diversity. So if it's too exploitable, people like casual players would get very bored because all the hardcore players would just play the optimal strategy. But if there's a way to optimize your strategy, the hardcore players are the ones that get bored. That's an interesting way to think about it.
There just has to be variance. There has to be variance. And the variance of StarCraft 2 could be, right now, let's say a Protoss doing like a Dark Templar Prism drop is overpowered, and everyone does it in every matchup. They're like, DTs are ridiculous. The variance there is how you micro your units. Because what if you scout it and you're like, oh, yep, he's doing the DT build again, and then now I know how I want to do something different than the other guy because I can micro my units in a different way. I can set something up differently, and with not just like build stuff, but I can use them differently. And then another guy might play a completely different style against what is currently considered to be overpowered. But if there's AI always doing it for you and something gets figured out that's overpowered, it's really hard to give variance there, which is why I think the system of like the randomness, like the 5 random generated things and like multiple tiers of it or whatever, I think that would work better for a game like that. Going back to that.
Okay. Yeah. Okay. So can you talk a bit more about you said most people are not playing with a competitive mindset.
I really think they're not.
Can
Yeah.
you explain?
No,
can you explain a little bit more, like how a hardcore gamer thinks, like what is this competitive mindset outside of just trying to find strategies to win more, or is it just that?
So I'll make one of the explanations really really quick, and the other one I'll go more into detail again. But the casual player literally cares about winning and losing. If they think they're competitive but they're casual, all they care about is win loss. They don't care about anything else. That's it. Like, did I win? Yeah, I won. I justified. Cool beans. That's it. But a hardcore gamer is going to break the game down way more in their own mind about what they think, and they're going to think about what is balanced, what is abusable. And some people get really complaining about this, and they like overthink like the balance, and they're like everything's broken, like Terran players, for instance. But you'll get players that are hardcore that they will dedicate their lives to playing the game. It's not like I'm going to play 2 hours a day. I'm going to play 30 minutes a day. They're going to play like 8 hours a day if they really like your game, or like 12 hours a day. Like they're going to live on that game. And they're going to, basically, it's going to give you a community that's very strong. It's going to give you a community that feels alive all the time. It's going to give you, just, if it's addictive, if it's a really fun game that you want to spend your whole day on, it's like that hardcore aspect of your community is going to inspire other people to play it more too. Again, especially now that streaming is a thing. Because the hardcore players are going to be the ones that are probably going to do something like stream your game every day if it was really, really good. Yeah. And then the way that a hardcore player will be competitive is they will literally push themselves repeatedly. They won't just go for a win, and no matter how hard or easy it was, a win's a win. They don't give a shit about a win's a win. They care about actually like doing things better than they did before every time. So if they play a game where it's like that was easy as hell, but I won, it's like a total mismatch. They just destroyed somebody else. They're not going to feel satisfied about that. They're going to be like, well, that guy just sucks. So, I want harder challenges than that. And they will eventually, they will always look for things that are ways to advance at, how they do it. And they will always look at the game in ways that they can break it and abuse it. Like for instance, if I'm a hardcore player, okay? If I'm a hardcore player, I'll give you one example that I hope this will make a lot of sense. If I'm a hardcore player and there's like a dungeon that just got made, okay? And let's say it's really fun. It's like you got to run around in this arena and you got to like keep killing waves of enemies and you got to survive or something like that. And like the average player is going to play it and be like, holy crap, there's so much action. This is so fun. Crazy. But then let's say a hardcore player and like the reward at the end is like a bag of loot or something. I don't know. Just some reward at the end. So you care about doing it more than once. And then a hardcore player, let's say he figures out if you stand in a certain location and you stand on like an object, all the mobs get really stupid and they don't attack you anymore. And they just sit there and they break and they just die by doing nothing. A hardcore player who cares about the advancing of himself, whether it be through loot or like through rank or something like that, he will literally fucking stand there on that object and be like, I'm going to keep farming this. And it looks super boring, but he's going to farm it all day because he cares about whatever the reward is in some way. Okay. And yeah, like that's the difference. Like hardcore players don't care about the gameplay aspect of being fun as much. They care about being better than everyone else, honestly.
That's very interesting. So, were there any moments in your like career as a pro or even now as a streamer where you said, damn, I wish this was different about Starcraft. Like I don't like this about Starcraft. It makes it outside of specific like balance changes that come and go with patches, right?
Yeah.
Like about the core game design.
Yes, there is one major thing that I was very disappointed about with Starcraft, which has nothing to do with the game balance. I always told myself not to get frustrated about game balance because I feel like people who do get very toxic mindsets. It's really hard to be motivated to practice when you think the game is broken. So you have to like really psychologically tell yourself that the game is balanced and it's you who needs to get better. It's not Blizzard who needs to balance the game better, and that justifies you not to practice. So I never cared about that as much. If you're a pro gamer, you need to honestly have a good mindset if you want to like be consistent and not just be the guy who's around for 2 months. But now a serious answer to what you said though, like was there something Blizzard missed the beat on with releasing StarCraft 2? And my answer would be community. They totally fucked up community in this game. They outsourced everything community-wise to outside areas of StarCraft 2. Chat channels didn't exist, and even though they do exist now, they're complete shit. There is no clan system really in StarCraft 2. Like there is, but again, it's fucking awful. Like I feel like they could have honestly just implemented the community aspect of features that they had in Warcraft 3, and that would have been good enough already. That would have been amazing. But if they would have like just started with that as a baseline, and then maybe like added stuff onto it and increased it more, that would have been even cooler, way better. I like for me, honestly, I could give a shit less. I could care less about StarCraft 2's community features on the game itself. Everything I have done on StarCraft 2, whether it be make a friend, have a practice partner, meet people that I have relationships with now, like a lifetime, like friends and stuff. Every single person I've met on this game, through one way or another, has been because of LAN events and streaming and social media. It has not been because I have played somebody in ladder and been like, "Hey, man, let's talk. Like, dude, let's hang out. Let's be friends." Like, I have literally made like no friends in StarCraft 2 itself. But the thing about it is, in like Warcraft 3 and in like World of Warcraft and in Starcraft Brood War, I actually did do that. Like, I actually have I have buddies that I played Starcraft Brood War with and Warcraft 3 with, that I would meet on the game, because there would be some times I would literally log into those games and I would have the intention to log in to play, but then I would get caught up in like a clan channel or something like that, and you would just start talking to somebody and have like join in a conversation, and you would actually spend like 2 hours in a conversation and be like, "Well, I actually got to go now." I logged in to talk for a while about stuff related to the game or people on the game, like people that become my friends online, and like that kind of stuff happened a lot. A lot of people actually became buddies online, but now you don't care at all about talking to anybody on Battle.net because the chat channel system is so awful that no one, like literally everyone who logs into StarCraft expects like an isolated experience, unless when you log in, you're expecting to play with a friend before you log on, like someone you're talking to in some other means. Like you already know.
Okay. Yeah, that's right. That's interesting.
Like the way I think Warcraft 3 did it was there were clan channels that kind of like dominated the server, and when you didn't know anything, you weren't a part of that. But when you became more invested and you started realizing who was good on your server, you started wanting to go to their channels, and sometimes the channels would be actually full because there was capacity. The capacity back in Warcraft 3 was like 40 players in a server, in a channel. So then it was like channels full, and then it starts giving you this desire to be like, okay, now I really want to join that channel because I want to be in there. It sounds cool. And then when you're in those channels, it gives you self-pride if you care about being good at the game, because you actually get to display all of your stats in a channel format that was like, hey, this is, when people scroll through it and they see something that's like, oh, this guy has this specific icon associated with his name, you have to be very good to get that. That's like a hard one to get. So that automatically makes this person look good. And then if you profile them, it has a very detailed stats list where like right away, where it's like the second you profile someone, you're like, oh wow, I can tell this guy's really good. He has like 80% win rates or 90% win rates. He's amazing. And then like this person then gets like, you know, messaged a lot by other players where they're like, hey, would you like to play some team games with me? I'd love to play some games with you. And like that was like the Warcraft 3 version of being a celebrity. It was cool. It was fun. And like if you were competitive and you cared about being competitive, you actually got people to like acknowledge you for that. It was basically just acknowledgement. It was fun. And then StarCraft 2 again. That's why I tell people a lot of times that don't care about your wins and losses that much. About if you care about your record, because the only person who really cares about it is you. No one's honestly going to ever look at your record unless they just played you in a game. That's about the only time it'll ever happen. Like I don't know. It's yeah. You go ahead though. I'm sure you want to say some stuff, and I've been talking for a while.
No, that's the best way to use our time, I think. No, that's very interesting. I didn't think about that part of community, like allowing good players to show off how good they are, and that's, now that you say it, it's very interesting. Like it's a very interesting way to motivate these hardcore players to play the game too. Like if you are very good but nobody can know about it, that kind of sucks, right? Because
Yeah.
what's the point? Only you know, unless there's already tournaments. But if the game is at that stage, yeah,
Yeah, for sure.
you already
Acknowledgement's huge,
have
man.
yeah. So another question is about like, what are your thoughts on the relation between esports and streaming? I mean, that's what you do mainly, but I'm also referring more generally to how would you think about designing a game so that it's fun to watch? Not only like, because your stream is very teaching oriented, but some other streams are like players don't even talk and they just play. How would you think or what do you think a game needs to be fun to watch, not only to play and to try to get better?
It needs to have exciting moments. It needs to have build-ups and exciting moments. That's the biggest one. Like for instance, a game like Starcraft would be, the build-up would be the developing stages of the game and little things that kind of change the pace of the game and here and there and whatever. But then exciting moments in Starcraft 2 would be the moment when someone's going to engage, like a micro fight essentially, and you don't fully know how it's going to go every time. Sometimes you can assume how it's going to go, but then every once in a while you could also get surprised by like, holy shit, that just happened. Like everyone gets pumped up by like a fat disruptor hit, or like the biggest AoE like storm spread on an army, or like the best fungals or banelings that are burrowed that just blow up half an army. That it changes the course of the game. Stuff like that, where it's like moments that can be really exciting, but there's always build-ups to it. It's not just like constantly exciting the whole time. And it's not just constantly just build-ups the whole time where like nothing actually really happens. That would be like for StarCraft 2. That's why that game. And then a lot of people that are watching it, if you are someone who's really good at the game, you could that they also, not only do you play it but you also watch it. You can like be someone who's a pro gamer and you can watch someone in GSL and you can be like, okay, I can appreciate the build-up even more because I know how hard it is to do what these players are doing. And then you can, like, it gives you more of an appreciation for the build-up, and then everyone can understand the exciting parts, because the exciting parts are easy. It's like, oh wow, things are exploding, cool, this is awesome. Like it looks, players that aren't as good, they can always appreciate the exciting parts, but then it also if you're someone who does not understand and appreciate the build-up as much, just having the build-up itself and not having constant excitement, it makes the parts that are exciting more special, because it's not just overdone. It actually like gives you, moments to like anticipate, and then something does happen, or maybe it doesn't. But then you have more anticipation where you're like, okay, well now they didn't actually take, like a little bit of a fight happened, but nothing really happened. Then they backed off, and now they're trying to like rotate around or whatever. Like just having lows and highs of a game, in every game, where it's like often enough to where it's always going to be exciting at times. That's not going to be like exciting once every like 5 hours, where it's just like some days you're just bored the whole time. So you're just trying to find a good balance of however you're designing the game would be great. And in a game like, for instance, like I'll give you another example, would be like, think about like Diablo or like Path of Exile or something like that. The low point would be you're just running around, you're grinding, and a high point would be like you leveled up and you got something new, like a new ability, or you found or even better yet, you found an item you really want or is really fucking good. And that's like a super high because it's not expected to happen, it's random. And you're like, oh wow, I found that? That's crazy. And it makes you get all excited, and you get like this endorphin high where you're like, now I want to keep going and see what the next thing happens. And then you kind of get in this mode again where it doesn't have to be exact. It's not going to be a sequence where it's like every 35 seconds something exciting will happen. It could be 5 minutes from now. It could be 12 minutes from now. It could be 45 minutes from now. Like something exciting could happen eventually, but you don't really know when it becomes down to like AI. Like it's random. It's a percentage chance. It could be a very low percentage chance, but it is random. So when it does happen, it gets exciting. Just like when you get two players that are playing against each other in StarCraft, it's two players making choices that are never going to be the same every single time. And it could be something as simple as they are doing the same exact thing, but instead of choosing to fight in that specific location, they chose to fight somewhere else, which changes surface area of armies. Maybe they're fighting on a ramp now, and now things change. And it changes the outcome of how both players decide to follow the rest of that fight. Or, you know what I mean? Like there's variance again there. And that's what makes excitement exciting, because you don't really know when it's going to happen. It's anticipated, and you think you might know to a degree. Like you think that the chance of it happening could happen, but then when it does happen, you're like, oh yeah, well fuck yeah, it happened, and like that was exciting to watch, or that was exciting to play, for instance.
Cool. Yeah, it's like that enables both spectators and players to build anticipation. And yeah, I like the concept of like having intense moments and more chill moments.
Yeah.
I think that's something interesting to try to come up with in the game. Well, I guess that's all the questions I had. I don't know. I'll be thinking about this stuff and coming up with an early prototype to be developing in the next few months.
So,
Uh,
just to
and
just ask you a question: is your game going to be the game you were kind of referring to in the beginning, where it's going to be like divvied up tasks of RTS, where like maybe one player micros, one player macros, or you have AI assistants and you just macro it or you just micro it? Is that where your game's kind of leaning towards?
no, those were kind of no.
Okay.
Those were just ideas to get talking about these things.
Okay.
I'm still deciding what I want my game to be about. One idea was, yes, that the macro versus micro division, but I think that doesn't work after talking with you.
Yeah.
So I'm more leaning towards. I mean, I think it could work, and I think about it if the macro only side has randomness in it, like in card games. But I'm not exactly sure how I would make that work. But I'll think about it. um, I'm leaning more towards just having a very micro intensive game where you need multitasking of different kind of units with different abilities in that kind of simplified. So to put it in StarCraft terms, imagine if you would have to play a round of Stalker with Blink against Stalker with Blink, and after that you play some other micro game with against the same player, and say 7 rounds of that, and the one who wins more wins the game.
Yeah.
Um, I kind of want to make the asymmetry part work, because I think it's one of the it's a thing that gives a lot of depth to StarCraft, because every matchup is so different and every race has so many different options, and the combinations are super fun to watch and to play and to learn too. So that's another thing, that learning needs to be fun. Otherwise, I mean, there are some games that have a very high skill cap, but learning is a pain in the ass. I think that's something StarCraft does really well.
Yeah.
It's very very fun to learn, like what build orders the other races can do, what you can do to counter them. Anyway, going back to what I was saying, I I'm really hoping I can make the asymmetry part work. And by the way, I didn't mean like the same team, one player doing micro and the other doing macro. It's just, imagine a game where one, like your opponent does only micro and you just do macro, and whatever that means for that game. So in the example of
The dungeon thing?
building,
Yeah.
yeah, that's one idea. But yeah, that model has the problem of how do you make it work so that you cannot think of all the strategies ahead of time. And maybe that's what I tried to suggest with having, instead of only micro versus only macro, having one player only do a little bit of macro. Say, for example, the adventure party player just can decide which skills their 3 characters. Say you have a mage, a fighter, and an archer, and you can choose which skills you level up or which items you buy, which is kind of macro because it's your strategy. And then the dungeon builder will just build the dungeons, but then they will have to, in some way, which I need to think about, and if you have ideas, feel free to tell. But in some way, they would also need to control parts of the game in a micro way. So in this way, we would have one player mostly doing micro and the other mostly doing macro, but you still have both on both sides. Does that make any sense? Or
Yeah. I feel like I get it. I feel like the example I gave you before would be a great way to have like the macro guy do it. Like he has to have very like options that are not always going to be the same possibilities. Maybe maybe there's like a round of like 30 tier 1 traps that exist, and maybe like 10 of them or a choice of like 5 of them appear for him to choose in this particular map. And again, the map is always also never the same. So maybe it like people will start realizing things like it's not just oh, this one trap is very abusive. It'll start making people think about things like where you can say, oh, when you have really tight corridors, this particular trap is better for tight corridors. And now this map is a tight corridor type map that just has now spawned in front of us. And then that changes things. And maybe you could have the same type of things where it's like your champions could have a range of choices where they could choose from. And maybe you could have a champion that has an ability like the fighter, for instance, where he has this like slam ability that just like breaks walls down. And now what was a tight corridor becomes an open area. And it, like both players can like engage with the environment, and not only that, but also with each other, where they can see how their strategies are developing. And did I just are you still there? Did I lose you? Hello? Did I lose you just now?
Oh no.
Okay, my computer just like almost shut down. Sorry.
Okay.
But so like you could have like it's not just about interacting with each other. I think it's also about interacting with the environment, and it would make players have to have the capability to choose things on the fly. It would increase the skill gap of the game, like the skill ceiling of the game, because it's not just like this is abusable, abuse that, abuse that, abuse that. It's like this is abusable on some maps, and then it's not on others. And then you'd have to like understand that. And that's why sometimes when you can get someone who's like, okay, this is just really good. This is just a solid choice. A new player can experience that and be like, okay, I know what I like. That's my style right there. I use it. It works often. And they're like, cool. But then as soon as you start getting that's like entry level, right? It's fun because it works. And you're like, okay, I like doing this. Just like someone who's playing the micro aspect of it. Maybe they prioritize like a shield block ability. Like it's something that can like cover, like almost like a Reinhardt thing from like Overwatch, where it's like a big fucking shield that people can get behind. Maybe that's like something someone prioritizes where it's like, this works a lot. That's how my playstyle will be. But then suddenly, it doesn't work anymore. And you have to figure that out. Like once you get to a higher level, because now suddenly players understand. It's like, oh well, okay. Now it's a tight corridor situation, or sorry, it's like an area where like shields are abusable front to back. But now I'm gonna start abusing something that like goes from top to bottom and like shoot over his head or something like that. Or I don't know. Like you can definitely like get really creative with it about ways you can abuse it. But like certain things work better on certain maps, and knowing the balance of that, and then having the ability to also alter your environment a little bit would be really cool. Because that way it's not just like, oh, it's a tight map, I'm going to do tight, abusable things. You can make the map, but you can now choose yourself to be like, do I want to let it be, let the environment remain as it is, and maybe go for more power choices, or like for what I'm going to be doing, or do I want to like invest more into like environmental changing things because it'll fuck over my opponent's build. And that becomes where it's like meta, and it's not always going to be the same. Like there's a way to go counter meta there.
I really like that idea. Like the micro player being able to change the structure of what the macro player built.
Yeah.
And also something you just that made me realize that it's very important that both players have some way of reading what the other one is doing. So you do in Starcraft where you scout and you have to react to what the opponent is doing.
Yeah.
There needs to be a way for both players to realize what the other one is doing and try to counter it, or at least have the opportunity to react.
Well, like, yeah, like for instance,
that's something
like to give an example, and like in StarCraft 2, let's say I have an Overlord and I see, oh, there's an Adept walking to my base, and then he kills my Overlord, and then now like 5 Adepts show up on my base. And because he like had an Adept already in the beginning, I'm already kind of expecting Adept aggression, and then it just kind of continues from that point on, and now I'm kind of like going down that path with him. He doesn't have to do it, but he chose to, and I was kind of expecting it after kind of seeing what was going on. And maybe in that game, you could like have, where it's like maybe like a floor panel or something, or like a sensor like sets off a trap, and it's not just like it gets set off once and it's done. Maybe it's like reusable, where it like it shoots once every like 2 seconds, like a spike, or something. And now you're like, okay, well this guy's definitely starting to prioritize like these types of traps. So now I'm gonna start rethinking how I'm gonna play against this, because he's already like showing his hand a little bit, that he's already going down this pathway a little bit, but like maybe he doesn't have to go all the way down there and like only make spike shooter traps or something like that. But like being able to like having traps that would be like reusable would influence this more, where it's not just like, for instance, like a cloth on the floor that drops you in a pit of spikes, or you know, like that could be a thing too, where like maybe you just die or you don't die and then that's over. But it obviously you also said there's going to be multiple traps in your game too, where it's like if you were to make the game like that, like for that example, because he's continuously building it as he goes, and then maybe here's another example. Maybe this would be a cool balance way for your game, in my opinion. The longer the game goes, like there could be an end point, and the longer the game goes, maybe you give the advantage more and more and more to the defensive player, the player who is making the dungeon, so he can start doing things as the game progresses longer and longer to make it progressively harder and harder and harder for the micro player. And the micro player needs to have like a fire under his ass basically to go. It creates action. It creates this moment of like this feeling of like I need to do stuff now. I can't just sit there and wait and wait and wait and really theory craft and wait and wait and wait and theory craft. Like you have to do something. So the advantage gets progressively lower for the micro player the longer he waits. That would be a cool way to do it too. And then that way, if the micro player could like kind of like almost like predict, because he's so good, he can like predict what he thinks, like just from like little things where like, for instance, if you're a really high level Starcraft player, you can see little subtle little subtle things like a probe's movement, its pathing. And I'm like, oh, I already know what build he's doing. He hasn't even built anything yet. And I'm like, I call his fucking build, and he does it. And then I can do that because I know what looks real and what doesn't. Like what looks like appropriate and what looks awkward. And I can analyze that because I have experience at the game. Whereas someone who's like Gold League will just be like, oh, there's a probe. But he won't have any idea. He'll literally not think twice about it. Just, oh, there's a worker. And that's it. So being able to have like aspects of the game that would be like that, where you could like master it and you could abuse each other in that way, where it's like you could try to like circumvent your opponent's stuff in a way where like maybe I don't know, like again you could get really technical here about ways you could really balance the game around it, but just having the aspect of micro player, the guy who's controlling the heroes needs to go. He needs to like the advantage for him is if he goes faster and makes choices quickly, and the advantage for the creator, the dungeon guy, would be if he creates obstacles that are harder and weird and awkward to deal with, that create longer amounts of time that have to be dealt with. And then he gets more of an advantage through like maybe he gets more resources to then create more shit with or something. Or maybe the dungeon slowly increases in like length over time, so that like the AI keeps like progress. It's almost like Tetris in a way or something, where like it keeps just creating a new floor over and over and over, and it gets longer the longer the micro guy waits. And if he waits long enough, he just dies. Like maybe there's something where eventually there's like a death point where if he waits too long, he just gets punished for it.
Yeah, that sounds really interesting. I guess that would be kind of anticlimactic if the dungeon builder wins, but I get the idea. Don't worry, and I think it's a good way to kind of design the game where one player is trying to defend and stop the attacker from destroying his dungeon, and the micro player just wants to destroy everything and move as fast as possible.
Yeah. And also you could balance it too, where you could make it to where it's so not super anticlimactic for newer players, where maybe you could even have a mode where it's like you're a micro player or a macro player against AI, and there is no game ending point for you where it's like the negative. It's only the positive, which reinforces newer players to be winners. So because like no one wants to just play a game and then just like have it be like, oh, you didn't do something you needed to do and now you're just dead now. Like a newer player can like progressively learn and like start approaching the game in an easy, casual way. But then as you get better and better, maybe you have leagues like bronze, silver, gold, plat, whatever, stuff like that. And like now these like these moments where it rushes you into something, maybe that starts happening faster, or it starts becoming a thing now that exists in the game, player versus player. Because think about like as well, like I'm gonna tell you a really popular franchise, and this has the same concept that what I was just talking about, which is battle royale games. You know battle royale games, like Fortnite. Yeah. Okay, so games like that I feel like are only exciting because it puts you in pressure where it's like you have X amount of time to go to this area, otherwise you're gonna die. You have X amount of time to go to this next area, otherwise you're gonna die. You have X amount of time to go to this next area, otherwise you're gonna die. And it creates these moments of actually having. It increases the chances where you're actually going to have those moments where you have players engaging other players. and it's not just the guy can be like, I'm looting for 45 minutes and I am taking my sweet ass time and I am not going to move. Because imagine how boring that would be if you made a dungeon and you set up all these traps and you were like, okay, I've set up like 15 traps, and the micro guy who's using his champions, he's literally just repeatedly picking up like items out of this one chest over and over with his like warrior, and his mage and his archer just sitting there. And he's just fucking not moving. And this is like, is he ever going to come? Like, oh my God, this is so boring waiting for him to do something. And you just like wait and wait and wait and wait. So yeah, it's I feel like there has to be like a one player like needs to do something. There has to be like a reason why one player feels the need to attack the other, and that exact same thing exists in like Starcraft 2 as well, where when you have a player who's on like 5 bases or 4 bases versus a player who's on 2 bases and he's like mining out of his resources. That's a big one. Is like your resources mine out. If you don't expand and you don't keep the advantage of like defensively, you're okay. You have to attack, otherwise you die. And it creates moments where you have to now attack your opponent. Or if like you harass, and let's say Helion's dropping my mineral line, and I lose all my workers. I have to do something now. Otherwise I'm just going to die. Like it creates these moments where you have to, it forces engagements now between the two players. And sorry, I just want to say this last part. Like the really cool thing to balance though, as like a game creator, isn't just creating moments where it's like let's make a system that just forces a player to fight the other player. Like that's the idea, that's the concept, but the way to balance it in a fun way is to give players choice and how they can then approach that situation, so it's not always like as simple as, oh, I have to attack and that's it. It's like I can attack in 5 different ways or 10 different ways or 15 different ways. Like I could go, like for StarCraft, I could be like, how do I want to do this? Do I want to fight his army? Do I want to siege him? Do I want to like drop his main? Do I want to Nidus him? Do I want to bounce around his base? Do I want to be conservative? Do I want to be like, just go for the throat right away? Like you could do a lot of ways of going about it, but the concept is it forces engagements between players.
Yeah, that's very interesting.
Because whenever you don't have gameplay that does that, when you have gameplay that allows players to go at their own pace, you get really boring, stale gameplay. And I'm going to tell you right now, for me as a competitive player, that's the reason why I played Hearthstone and I stopped playing Hearthstone. I got so bored of that game because every time I'd play Hearthstone and I would take 3 fucking seconds to take a choice. And I would sit there and my opponent would be like, no, 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 no. And then the rope would be like, hurry the fuck up. And it would go all the way to the end and they would make a choice. I'd be like, okay, I waited 2 minutes for that. And I would take 3 seconds, make a choice. And then it's their turn again. No, no, wait, hold on. Maybe. And you see them like rotating their cards around, like, which one do I want to use here? And you're like, oh my God. Can this guy go a little faster? Jesus. Like, this like takes forever. And yeah,
I understand.
Yeah, it just needs to be like more compelling. It needs to be, it needs to go maybe like at a good pace.
Reward players that can think fast and act fast in some way.
Yeah, exactly. Because
okay, man.
Yeah. And that's I would say that's where you get the balance between real time or just strategy based. Like just take off the real. Because you have moments where if you have a game that's like real time or like thought process where it's like how fast can you engage these things and then move forward, and it gives the benefit to the player that can think actively quickly. And then sometimes you have a game that's just like strategy only, which is where micro doesn't exist. Like I feel like a lot of other RTSs besides Blizzard are more strategy only. It's definitely not real time. And it's like a lot more slowed down. It's a lot more like, it's like the Hearthstone example where it's like, okay, I'm going to take my time. And it's like, because if you send speedlings across the map in StarCraft 2, they get across the map, they attack, they're there super fast. And you got to like, if you don't use them as well, they could also die super fast. So you got to actively be using that unit all the whole time. But then you play another RTS game, like an example I'll give you is like a game called Grey Goo. That's one of the last RTSs I played besides Blizzard games, and everyone was hyped about it for a little bit. I tried it. This was like 4 years ago or something, or 5 years ago. I was not impressed. I played it for like 2 days because it was new and it was fun because it was new. But then it got really old really fast, and I'd be like, "Hey, Army, go across the map," and it takes like 6 minutes to get across the map. And your units, it's like you're almost like looking at the planet from like outer space, and your units are like little microscopic ants that are running around the map, and they're like running super fucking slow. And getting just like, it's like, well, I'm going to send that attack to go over there. I'll come back to it in a few minutes, and it'll probably be there. And all you have to worry about is like positioning. You don't have to worry about micro. You don't got to worry about like mitigating things and stuff like this. All you got to worry about is like, it's almost like you're a general of an actual army, where it's like, okay, we're going to set up the ranks on the right, attack from the right. And it's like, my strategy was correct, so I'll win. But there's no control there. So you can't actively change the way fights go in the middle of the fight. Like, for instance, I'm going to give you one example. This is where I'll end it on, okay? What's more exciting when you think about things like think about like medieval times, where it's like armies with like swords and shields fighting and shit like that? Would you rather be the general that's like, front line, attack, and you just watch it and they all march in, and they might fall over and die, or they might win, like, you know, crush their army, and you just watched guys like in a single file line just stabbing each other? You're like, yeah. Or is it more exciting to watch like Achilles and like Troy or some shit, who's like in the middle of everything, who's the fucking badass, who just like takes on like 8 guys at once, because he actually is so much more skilled than everyone else? And it creates these moments where you're not just like A beats B. Okay, cool. You're like, okay, well, A, if refined enough, can beat B, C, D, E, F, G, like all, like, you know, a bunch of other fucking letters of the alphabet, because he's a fucking badass.
Mm-hmm.
So that, I mean, moments like that are where control comes from, and like micro comes from, which is why that's such an important aspect, because again, it's the variance, it's the whole variance point. It's exciting to like be able to refine your skill enough to be able to overcome odds that you shouldn't be able to overcome, because no one else can.
Yeah, that's cool. Okay, man. Lots of great ideas here, and I think I'll think about this stuff and continue with. I was very excited about the like adding the micro player being able to break the structures that the macro player built, and I still need to think how to make the macro player need some control, because otherwise it wouldn't be interesting. But I'll go through that route, I think, and I'll let you know in a couple of months how it went.
Okay. Think about this, okay? Okay, I'm gonna give you one more idea. This is because I mean, we've talked a lot about conceptual stuff, but I haven't given you a lot of like we talked about less idea stuff, I guess. But I want to give you one idea. Okay, imagine this. Imagine a dungeon that has multiple options. Okay, and the way the microplayer can choose to disrupt these options would be, maybe there's like income places where there's like 3 key points in a dungeon or something like that, and only one is like game ending, where it's like the final point where if the microplayer gets there, it's over. But then there also could be like income points of a dungeon, and if a player optimizes to go there, then they can disrupt the income of the dungeon player. And if they choose to just go straight for the endpoint, it's going to be harder, because the dungeon player is going to have more income. So now the dungeon player can choose to prioritize, do they want to defend like heavily on the income points, and like let their like it's like almost like playing macro style, where you keep like your expansions, or do you just let them be like sacrificed and focus heavily on like the endpoint? And obviously, I feel like good players are probably gonna, like, once players start really learning how to do efficiency there, they're probably gonna find out ways to like maintain their expansions essentially in the dungeon, the ways that like increase their income more. And what income could be considered in that kind of a game would be like how fast you can get to like the tier or like the quality of traps. Like maybe your tech goes up faster and you get better traps quicker, or maybe like you just get more of them. Instead of getting 1 trap, you get 3 traps, so you get just more consistent traps all over the place. And maybe you can choose that. Maybe you can choose like talents each game that are given to you, and you can like, it's like random again, where it's like you can have the ability to get, now instead of getting 1 trap, you get 2 traps every turn, or like every like income round or something like that, where the income is automated. It's like time based, but it's how long can you maintain it? Like how long can you keep it alive for? Does that make sense?
Yeah, that sounds great.
Okay. Well, it's just an idea. I don't know how, but I'll let you go, man. I know, yeah, you probably got shit to do as well.
gonna have dinner now, and then I'm going to start programming this. I'm very excited.
All right, dude.
Okay,
Well,
thanks so much.
yeah, thank you,
This was
man.
great.
And good luck with everything. And take it easy. Have a good dinner, man.
Thank you. Bye.
See you, dude.
See you around.
All right. So thanks for watching, guys. That was a. It's not really like that. Kind of took the place of like a coaching lesson, but obviously that wasn't a coaching lesson. That was more of like a consultation of like talking about games, ideas, theory, elements of like what makes games good, stuff like that. It was different. Hope you guys enjoyed it. Yeah, but thank you for watching. I will see you guys around in the next video. So until then, much love. Have a good night. Have a good day. And bye, guys. See you.